Bine v-am găsit la podcasturile Habits by Republica, o serie de conversații contemporane despre ce ne face bine în viață. Sunt Alexandra Găteș, fondator al Societății Omului Sănătos și creator al programului Habits, și în 2022 vom explora împreună cu invitații noștri problemele omului modern, soluții, idei noi și concepte interesante în domeniul sustenabilității, al prevenției în sănătate și al comunicării. Această conversație semnată Habits by Republica vă este oferită cu sprijinul Regina Maria, Rețeaua de Sănătate care crede că prin educație putem construi o societate mai sănătoasă. Conversația de astăzi, despre nutriție, este moderată de Daniel Stamin, improvement coach, biohacker și membru al comunității noastre Societatea Omului Sănătos, cu dr. Naidoo, profesor al Universității Harvard, psihiatru nutrițional și autorul cărții The Food Mood Connection.
Hi Uma, welcome to Habits. I'm very glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this kind invitation.
And we will start directly with the questions. Questions that I hope are as interesting as possible for our viewers. My first question is, and I assume you don't hear it for the first time, what is nutritional psychiatry?
Sure, of course. Nutritional psychiatry is the use of healthy whole foods and nutrients to really improve overall mental well-being, or mental fitness, as I like to call it. It's really about finding a personalized plan using the scientific evidence behind what we know at the current time to improve mood and other conditions in mental well-being.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide to build a career in this field, which you actually also are pioneering now?
You know, it's interesting. I wish I could say that I had woken up with a grand plan one day, but I didn't. I really followed things that I loved to do. Clearly, I love food, and that had me on a health journey around nutrition. I grew up in a very large South Asian family, and there was always food and cooking and grandmothers and aunts in the kitchen making a lot of food. But there was also a focus on science and medicine. I had several aunts and uncles who were medical doctors, but a few Ayurvedic practitioners in the family. So food and medicine were always part of the conversation. And when I moved away to study, I really took my family recipes, spices, and those ideas of food with me. And I found that cooking was not a burden for me. It was a very creative space. And so I followed that passion, and it also led me to really wanting to learn more about nutrition. And truly, in medical school, doctors don't learn enough about nutrition. Some medical schools teach more than others. And I sort of started to put these pieces together for me, and found that when I learned about medications in mental health and understood the number of side effects that they have, I felt that individuals taking a medication needed more tools to feel better than just a medication. So one does not exclude the other. It actually works best together, and I still prescribe medications. But food and nutrition can really help someone to feel emotionally better as well. And I started to incorporate this slowly in my practice. I also decided to go to culinary school because Julia Child was my food hero. And when I was a very young student in Boston, I couldn't afford public television. I couldn't afford cable television. So I would watch public TV, and she was on. So she was kind of inspiration as a young cook, learning to make my mother's recipes and my grandmother's recipes. And when I learned, I followed her life. I read her books and her cookbooks, and realized that she had done that later in life, and that was her very big career. I decided, why not me? And so I was very fortunate in that the study of mental health and psychiatry, the study of nutrition, and the study of the culinary arts really came together. When I had the opportunity at my hospital to open a clinical service, which is the first such clinical service in the United States, I took that opportunity, and I was very fortunate with good mentorship to bring this field forward. And that really is how I came to it. The book is a whole other story, but that was how I started my clinic and really began to invest all of my time in this work.
It's good that you mentioned the book, because I also wanted to mention it. And you wrote the book, The Food Mood Connection, which is the name in Great Britain, as I understand. And in the US, it's This Is Your Brain on Food. So This Is Your Brain on Food is the US title.
That is correct.
The Food Mood Connection, this is interesting as a title. It's not just the food mood connection, it's also the food with its impact on mental health, like anxiety and depression, which you cover in your book.
Yes.
How much and how strong is this impact that it has on anxiety or depression? And I ask especially because in the last year, during the last year, I assume, and I read a lot of articles, that anxiety and depression has risen. So maybe there is a possibility to use food to keep it somehow not that high, the levels not that high in anxiety and depression. And the book is for sure a very, very interesting source for to do this. So do you have examples for what you cover in the book about anxiety and depression and food?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think that the last year, of course, has been difficult for many people. And I think that some of the statistics coming out at the moment around increased levels of depression and anxiety in the United States are quite concerning. And I'm assuming it is the same in other parts of the country. One of the things that has also emerged in the US, use that as an example, is that there have been a larger number of people who have gained weight during COVID. And I think where this becomes important is that our insulin resistance, our propensity for type 2 diabetes, and any inflammation that's going on in the body actually predisposes us as well to poor mental health or just not feeling emotionally well. Now, I think that the most important thing regarding the high levels of stress and anxiety is what can we do a year later into the pandemic to sort of rethink how we might be eating. A lot of things changed for people during the pandemic. More families were in quarantine together. There was a lack of supply of certain fresh foods or groceries. People really, certainly in the US, reached out for processed packaged foods because for the first time on television, there were some store shelves that were empty and people were panicked about food. And then with everyone being at home, people were seeking a lot of comfort. So there was an increase in buying different things for baking. And, I think I think that what eventually happened is that people were seeking comfort to feel better, were emotionally stressed. But now I also feel we've kind of gone through that first year, and it's time for us to look at where we're at emotionally and really reset. Foods that can help us is moving away from that diet of processed, ultra processed kind of junk foods, a lot of fast foods, foods that contain a ton of added or refined sugar. The concept I like to talk about is eat the orange and skip the store-bought orange juice, because the store-bought orange juice has no fiber, lacks some of the nutrients, and really has a ton of added sugar. Whereas if you eat the whole orange, you have a whole complete fruit there with all its nutritional value and fiber. So I think the closer we can step back from any of those habits we may have picked up during the pandemic and move towards healthy whole foods, the better off we are. So, for example, if your kitchen cabinets, are stocked with cookies and cake and things and candy bars that we know are not the best for our health, one of the things we want to be doing is thinking about replacing those with healthier whole foods. In terms of specific foods, in the book, I go through the different conditions, and there is some overlap because there's some principles that really are related to improving your gut health. So the gut microbiome has become very important in understanding mental health. And those foods include things like high fiber foods, which include things like fruit, vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains, include prebiotic foods, include probiotics, which can be a supplement, and include fermented foods. So there's some overarching foods that really do help our gut health and that we want to be trying to include in our diet. while understanding that there may be individuals who have conditions like Crohn's disease, IBS, IBC, SIBO, that may struggle to eat that much fiber. But for the rest of us, certainly I can speak to the US, 1 in 10 Americans is eating enough vegetables from a survey that was done. So we know that we are quite behind in our fiber, but we tend to be worrying about protein and how many carbohydrates we're eating. So I think finding that balance becomes important.
Focusing on fiber and fresh foods, less the processed foods, as I understand. And what foods would you recommend as brain foods to help your brain to be more focused, to be more, let's say, present and not diverge and lose focus all the time? What would you say would help here?
Absolutely. Exactly. So all of the foods I mentioned already do, and then I'll add to the list. The way that the previous foods work is that they are, for example, fruits and vegetables are rich in polyphenols and antioxidants and have anti-inflammatory properties. By working on the gut and brain are connected, they naturally work on the brain as well. So those are important for understanding that the gut microbiome need to be nurtured and fed, and all of the foods I mentioned kind of feed and take care of them. Other components or other groups of food are things like omega-3 fatty acids, which can be found in fatty fish like salmon or mackerel or anchovies, but you can also get it in plant-based sources, and plant-based sources are short-chain omega-3 fatty acids found in things like chia seeds, flax seeds, sea vegetables, algae, walnuts. So you can obtain it from those sources. That is a good one. A much overlooked group are spices. The spices turmeric and saffron have actually been shown to help mood. Saffron is, as we know, an expensive spice, and you don't use much of it when you cook. So that's one of the few places that I say a supplement is actually a good idea. Because if you feel that you're not getting enough benefit from your food, you can use a supplement and get a good saffron supplement. But turmeric is very easy to add to a soup, a smoothie, or a tea. And I always say add a pinch of black pepper, which makes it about 20 times more bioavailable and absorbable to the brain and body. So that's important to add in as well. And then, the food groups that I just spoke about are important. Your vitamin B, your magnesium, your other minerals become important, but you can get those through food. You don't just have to take a supplement. So you build up on that list for all of these being brain foods. And then what I also do is talk about foods that worsen, say, depression or worsen anxiety in the different chapters. So you also know the things to watch out for.
What would worsen the anxiety, for example? Because you said before, there are foods that provoke inflammation in the body and also in the brain. Is it right? And which foods would that be? Is it just processed foods, a lot of sugar, or does it have to do with sugar? Sugar is also a stimulant. In the end, it gives also a little bit of energy to the body.
Absolutely. So our bodies do need sugar, and we can get sugar from things like fruit. So a piece of fresh fruit comes with other nutrients, fiber, polyphenols, which are good for our body. And so absolutely our body definitely needs sugar, but we are talking about those added and refined sugars in processed and ultra processed foods. Other foods that worsen the anxiety are things like foods that are high in trans fats, as well as the unhealthy processed vegetable oils, which are used in many fast food restaurants because it's less expensive. Then refined carbohydrates, such as, say, sugary donut. That would be an example of something that would really worsen these symptoms. And then, artificial sweeteners are also important, because artificial sweeteners actually are contained in many things, especially if someone is trying to maybe curb their sugar habit. They might find a product that says sugar-free, but it might have artificial sweeteners, and these are associated with worsening anxiety. Then the other things we can limit or cut back on, depending on how our body reacts, are things like coffee and alcohol, and in certain cases, gluten-containing products. And with those three groups, it really is about the individual person or patient that I'm working with. People have different reactions to coffee. Someone can drink coffee and the guideline is drinking less than 400 milligrams a day. That tends to not bother people with anxiety. But another person, because the microbiome is so unique, might feel very jittery if they have a cup in the morning, or cup at any time, in which case they need to be careful. Similar with alcohol, a person may have a glass of wine at dinner, another person may be relying on that glass of wine to put them to sleep. Then it starts to work in the sleep architecture and worsens your sleep. And when you don't sleep well, you get up anxious, you get up tired, and so it starts off a cycle. And with gluten, it really is, some people struggle more with gluten, and they might need to do a short elimination of gluten if they're extremely anxious and see if they have any improvement in symptoms. So it really becomes trying to tweak what that is for the individual person.
So it's always an individual approach to anxiety or depression, for example. Individual approach from
Absolutely.
also the outside influence and also the food. Outside, I mean that everything what is around you with sleep deprivation or the nutritions that you take and the vitamins that you have, everything counts into this, and it depends from person to person, and it makes a lot of sense. You mentioned before the gut. And a lot of people don't know that the gut and the brain is very much connected, and what you eat develops certain bugs in your gut area, in your gut microbiome, and this influences also the mood and the brain. And you call this in your book the gut-brain romance, which I like very much as an expression. And what exactly can you do now, for example, for your gut, so that your brain gets better? Better, I mean, you can be more focused, you can be less anxious, more courageous, or whatever good things that you can do.
Sure. So, I'm glad that you like the title of that first chapter, because I thought about it this way, a romance is not perfect on every day. Some days are good and some days are bad. Well, the same thing with the gut and the brain. They're connected, and people don't think about this because, in fact, they are on two different parts of the body. If you were to look at my little model here, you think this is the little guy with the large intestine, the small intestine, and the brain up here. So most people will look at me and say, well, how can they be connected? But there are several ways in which they are connected. The gut and brain actually start off from the very same cells in the developing embryo. So they grow apart, but they start from the same cells. Then the two organs are connected by a vagus nerve, which is otherwise called the wandering nerve in the body. It's the 10th cranial nerve. And I like to call it a two-way superhighway because it allows for chemical messages to travel 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, back and forth in a bidirectional way between these two organs. Then many people know about medications which in the United States are called Prozac or Zoloft, fluoxetine or sertraline, and many others, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They are used to treat depression, anxiety, OCD, many different conditions. But their receptors, more than 90%, are found in the gut. And so it's important for us to understand that. And then for the times that we're in, 70% of the immune system is in the gut. So that becomes important for us to understand in this, as you hinted at earlier, a very sort of holistic approach to thinking about how the systems are integrated through the gut-brain connection, and then how we try to find an underlying functional root cause for any type of condition. So it really is looking at all of the things, but one of the keystone parts of this is nutrition. And I think when people understand that these two organs are connected, they begin to understand that as we eat food and it gets digested, you can have from fast foods not so great to more toxic substances broken down. But if you're eating a healthier diet, you can have more positive substances formed in the gut that feeds those gut microbes and then helps our systems, our hormone system, our immune system, our mental health. All of it is combined. So it becomes understanding. It's almost like a symphony that goes on with the coordination of how we eat and how the microbes, there are about 100 trillion microbes that reside in the gut. They're there to help our physical and mental health. And if we feed them well with the right foods, they work to help us. But if we kind of feed them junk foods, fast foods, a lot of sugar, a lot of added refined sugars, they don't do well, but the bad microbes that also live there do well, and they take over and start to set up our gut microbiome for inflammation, which is called dysbiosis. And people may have heard the term leaky gut, and that's where it comes from, the inflammation in the gut that gets formed.
How about your diet in order to stay or develop the good microbiome? Do you need to have a diet that is constantly, let's say, vegetable or fruit oriented and not too much sugar and a little bit of carbohydrates, maybe not that much, or not too many processed carbohydrates? Do you have to be like this 100% of the time, or can you go to the fast food up and on, eat a cake up and on? Because, as you say, you feed the good microbes. Once you eat bad, you feed the bad microbes. Does this mean that the ones that are good are increasing, then they are decreasing when the others are increasing, and it's always like they balance out over time, and you're not just with good microbes, you're not just with bad microbes, it's always give and take? Or how does it work? It sounds too simple when I say it. That's why I'm asking you.
No, I think you're on the right track. So I think that it becomes highly individual. The way I describe it is that it's a dynamic system, and on any given day, if I get up and eat a sugary donut for breakfast, research shows us that those microbes in the gut start to change within 24 hours. I may not feel it, but it's going to impact me down the road. So same thing if I eat a healthier breakfast, right? So the way we want to think about this is not as though something is right or wrong. What we want to try to do is look at the habits that we have. If you're a healthy eater, continue doing what you're doing, and you already are doing a good job. If you're having other symptoms, definitely speak to your doctor about what those might be, because there are many reasons that your gut microbiome could be disrupted. For example, stress, poor sleep, all can impact that, as well as other things, hormone levels, etc. So if the way we want to then think about it is, if we have some poor eating habits that we've picked up during the pandemic, what we want to do is move to start to change those into healthier habits. If you're asking, if it's a birthday party and you have a piece of cake, is that going to change? Yes, there'll be a change in the microbiome, but if at the next meal you go back to your healthy eating, the balance will restore itself. The problem becomes that people have that piece of cake and they feel, because of the way the body works and the serotonin that's formed, people might feel good and they think, oh, I don't know what my doctor is saying, that I shouldn't eat these foods. Then they want more of it. And remember that sugar acts in the same cycle. Added and refined sugars act in the same cycle and the same receptors and reward system in the brain as things like cocaine. They work on dopamine. So when someone has that chocolate or that candy bar, they want more. Their body naturally wants to crave more. So it's all about finding for us what the correct ratio of those foods are. And anything moving away from that unhealthy diet is going to help you. And that's what I'd want people to take away, rather than rules, because I think in the US we are full of diet wars. Eat this, don't eat that. This is the best diet. Give up, eliminate this food or that food. And I think it gets very confusing for people. So I like to advise people on an individual basis because of our bio-individuality, but also because if you came to me and said, oh, it was my birthday and I had a piece of cake, I'm going to say that's great. Well, next day when you get up, have your usual routine. Do your exercise, do your mindfulness, do your meditation, make sure you're sleeping well, make sure you're hydrating, all of those things. It's all part of the system. So that's how I like to approach it.
It's a very interesting approach, and I think a very correct one. How do antibiotics impact our gut bacteria, and after impacting the gut bacteria, how does it impact also the mood or the brain indirectly then?
So, this is when we have an infection, we might need an antibiotic. And I think that one of the things we need to understand is if your doctor wants you to take your medication, it could be life-saving in many situations. I think where we've gotten into trouble in the US with antibiotics is the overprescription of them. So what happens is you have an infection, let's say you have a pneumonia, and you need to take an antibiotic which is going to kill those bacteria causing the pneumonia. What also happens is because of how the antimicrobial or the antibacterial, the actual medication works, it is also going to kill some healthy bacteria that live in your gut microbiome. So what could happen is that people start, they need to take, they say, a week of treatment for their pneumonia, but it could also start to disrupt the gut microbiome. So the best thing for them to do is to be continuing to eat healthy as best they can while they're taking that medication. Those fiber-rich foods which help to feed those bacteria will help. And then after the infection is treated, to continue eating a healthier diet that will help restore the microbiome. People who sometimes suffer and struggle with this a lot is if they have multiple infections that they've needed a lot of antibiotics for, and they might need a longer time to help restore that gut health. But this is where fermented foods, pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, kombucha can help as they help to heal, eating, including more of those vegetables, fruit, the high fiber foods, including a lot of the colorful foods, the color of the rainbow, the phytochemicals, all of that to restore. What can happen is when someone, to answer the last part of your question, when someone has an antibiotic, they could see over time a slight dip in their mood or worsening of the anxiety because of that disruption of the microbiome. So, we want to be thinking, how can we repair that? And we want to be thinking about a simple thing to remember is a happy gut is a happy mood. Obviously I talk about many other conditions in my book, but it's just a way to make sure you understand, you kind of remember that connection.
Yeah, my question would be, do you support, or is it possible to rebuild the gut bacteria after, for example, you had the antibiotics in a more or better way, in a more healthy way than just taking probiotics and prebiotics? You said already pickles and other foods that could, or fiber-rich foods that could build up those bacteria.
Right.
So it's also a strategy that you can build yourself up being more healthy than before, and this also evidently as a consequence could bring your mood also up, because I know a lot of people that had antibiotic like for 7 days or 10 days, and they got semi-depressed, let's say, during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can have a low mood also because when they have that infection, they have less energy. Their body is trying to fight off that infection. They may not be feeling like they're eating well. Sometimes they lose their appetite. They might have vomiting, other symptoms, diarrhea, or other things that come up. So they may not be feeling well. So naturally, there is a way in which the mood won't be great. But in addition to that is also the disruption of the gut microbiome. And the way to handle that is to start to build back those healthy foods and stay away from the foods that we listed that we want to limit and sort of cut back on. So building back the healthy salads, the leafy greens, folate in leafy greens, such as lettuces of different kind, kale, spinach, dandelion greens, all of those have rocket lettuce or called arugula, all have folate, and folate is a great nutrient for the brain. Low folate levels are associated with things like fatigue, loss of brain cells, and in fact, depression. So just including things like a leafy green salad, and then adding lots of colors of vegetables to it, the rich polyphenols from the vegetables, that's a simple thing right there. Or use those, make a soup with these vegetables, add in the turmeric and those spices. You can also eat prebiotic foods. You don't have to take any kind of supplement for that. Prebiotics are onions, garlic, leeks, asparagus, and several others, bananas, oats. Those are things you can bring back to your diet. So the way to do it is to start to build back those foods that are going to help your gut. The one exception is individuals who have other conditions where they can't tolerate as much fiber. They have to speak to their gastroenterologist about how to heal that. And it can be a little bit more challenging, but they can find other ways to do it. So you're absolutely right. You don't just have to take a pill or a supplement or a probiotic. In fact, one study indicated that when someone is prescribed an antibiotic, they actually shouldn't, there is no benefit from taking a probiotic supplement. So I, in this instance, really work through the angle of food, build it back up through how you're eating. Also work on your stress level, because if you're super stressed, that's going to disrupt your gut microbiome as well. If you're not sleeping, that's going to make an impact as well.
Great advice, thank you. Especially in Romania, we consume a lot of pickled food and also onions and garlics, and this I think is a good thing.
That's great.
Yes. You mentioned in your book also that the food we consume triggers an emotional state. My last question, and this is something I think should provoke you a little bit. What would you say is your most healthy eating habit?
I actually, well, it's two things. I'll tell you both. So one is I love spices, and I, through my research, found culturally, through the Ayurvedic practitioners in my family, but also through my own experiences of doing the research, found an immense brain benefit for spices. So I was very happy that I love spices and I love to add them to my food. But the other thing is that I actually love leafy greens. And so even though some of my patients will roll their eyes, I love things like arugula, rocket lettuce. I love dandelion greens. I love watercress. I love mixing it up. And I love spinach and kale. So I would consider those healthy habits. Like, I'm not going to turn down a salad if someone offers it to me. It's not the only thing that I like to eat. I like to eat a wide range of things. And as a chef, I like to cook lots of different things. But my constant challenge to myself is, how can I take this and make it equally delicious so I can share that recipe with someone?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Uma, thank you very much for all the knowledge and experience that you shared with us today. And it was a huge pleasure for me to talk to you. And I hope that in some form, maybe personal or also virtually, we'll have a discussion with you in some future habits conversations again. So all the best to you.
I would love that. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit, sperăm că v-a fost de folos ceea ce ați auzit și vă invităm în comunitatea noastră, Societatea Omului Sănătos.